The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I just started to talk in physical conferences in the end of the year of 2019, all the physical conferences that came after has been cancelled. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad, but from my perspective for life, we don't have time to be sad. Life are so short, and because of that, we always need to think about how to create good situations from a bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. In the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, we have a lot more time to spend at home. And in the first few days, I was just rearranging my apartment, move everything, change everything, and everything to create a good mood to stay at home. But then came the first weekend with the lockdown that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time on my weekend. And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that so many web developers all around the world loved it so much. And I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about, and it was one of the most easiest ideas that I had in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create the coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. And everything that you're seeing right now is done only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using a CSS preprocessor. And even for the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic of this game, like when I'm clicking the UMI button and it's opening the pop-up, the logic of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game menu frame and it will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click on those coronavirus creatures, they will disappear and the score of the game will go up. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? The countdown is built only while using CSS. And before you're writing any single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why, I remember an old code pen that I saw painted on Canvas HTML in the middle of the year of 2019 with this cute creature that remind me a little bit coronavirus creatures. And I needed to think about a name for the game and how to design the main navigation. And I don't know why I had in my mind this Chicken Invaders game. And when you are thinking about inspiration is always to take other older ideas and to create from them something else, something new. The first thing that I wanted to create is to create a coronavirus creature. And it's nice to see that this was my inspiration. In the end, the coronavirus creature was looking different, and I love it. This is my creature. And then I started to create the HTML part of every one of those coronavirus creatures. I'm using here a label HTML element with a class of coronavirus, and inside I'm putting input type radio. And you may ask, oh, I'm cutting with the sound, I think? Yes, okay. One, no, stop. Everyone hear me? Yeah? I will shout. Okay. Yeah, but we will continue. The show must go on. Okay, and you will ask why I'm using here label HTML element and why there is input type radio inside. This is part of the logic of the game that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are starting here with this div class of body. We have the body, and inside we have the 12 hairs and his both eyes. But
from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my HTML code, like to create those 12 hairs HTML elements. And in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus creatures. And I didn't want to copy-paste them one by one. And I needed to think about a way to solve this problem. And in my first time in my life, I'm using an HTML preprocessor that gives me the possibility to do the repetition in the HTML part in a smarter way. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of SAS that I'm using, I think, in the last 12 years for every one of my projects. And now, instead of doing this repetition part, I can write it in Pug. In Pug, we have variables, while loop, and I can create the HTML in a more dynamic way. And as you can see, Pug is written really different from regular HTML. But it's being compiled to just regular HTML. But when you are working in Pug, you cannot write half Pug or half HTML. And this means that I need to update all the HTML code to the new way that Pug is being written, okay? And now let's start to talk about the logic of the game. To understand it, let's take a look again on the game itself. Let's open the game itself, and let's understand how I'm separating all the part of the HTML to create the separated HTML parts of all the section. The first one is the game menu navigation. And this is one section of HTML that I need to represent in my code. The second one is when I will click on the How to Play button, it will open a pop-up. And yes, we can put frame above other frames. The third frame, in the same way, when I'm clicking the My button, it will open another pop-up. But this is the third frame that I need to represent in my HTML document. And the last frame is when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game. It will hide the game menu frame and it will open the game frame itself. And this is our last 4 frame that I need to represent in my HTML document. How I'm representing all those frames in a really easy way. I'm just creating, oh, it's back. Ooh, nice. Okay. And now, as you can see, I'm just representing all those frames that I'm just talking about them with the section HTML element. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID name, the first frame is the game menu frame, the second one is the game frame itself, and the third one is the pop-up of Who Am I? And the fourth one is the pop-up of How to Play. But when I'm loading this game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How I'm hiding all the other frames in a really easy way. I'm just giving all the other frames display none. Okay? And this way, when I'm loading the game, I'm only seeing the game menu frame. But now I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create flags that they will tell me if something is open or closed without using any JavaScript? And if you are thinking about input HTML of checkboxes, they are like flag. Uncheck, false. Check, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding 3 different checkboxes that every one of them is need to do different operation. Every one of them has its own ID name, and every one of them need to do different operation. For example, the first checkbox with the ID name of Toggle Game. If it's unchecked, this means that I want to see the game menu frame and to hide the game frame. But if it's checked, I want to do the opposite. I want to show the game frame, but to hide the game menu frame. The 2 other checkboxes are even more simple to understand. The checkbox that has the ID name of How to Play pop-up, if it's unchecked, don't show me the How to Play pop-up, but if you're checked, please show me the How to Play pop-up. And the third checkbox in the same way, the checkbox that has the ID name of Who Am I pop-up, if you are unchecked, don't show me the Who Am I pop-up, but if you are checked, please show me the Who Am I pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm giving them opacity of 0, position absolute, top minus something. You cannot see them and you cannot click on them. And now we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can we do it? To do that, I'm using a really old feature of HTML that I think is been mentioned here several times in this conference.
The game navigation button that you saw are not created from button HTML element. Instead, I'm using label HTML element that only look like buttons. And in order to them to work, what I'm doing here, I'm using here the for attribute that is being connected in every one of the label button to every one of the checkbox. For example, the save the world label button is being connected to the checkbox of Toggle Game. You see for attribute Toggle Game, and it's being connected to this checkbox with ID name of Toggle Game. This is also mean that if I'm clicking the Save the World label button, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change the status from status of unchecked to status of checked. If you will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked, and as many times you will clicking on it. The same way for the two other label buttons. If I will take this button, for example, of Who Am I label button, it's connected to the checkbox with the ID name of Who Am I pop-up. You click it once, it's changed to checked. You click it again, it's changed from checked to unchecked. And again, this is just changing those statuses of those checkboxes. It still doesn't do for us any visual operation. And now I need to use these statuses of those checkboxes to show or hide other frames of the game. And to do that, I'm using here two special CSS features. The first feature is the checked pseudo class. I can see if there is a specific checkbox which is in status of checked. And if there is a specific checkbox in status of checked, I can use the sibling selector that can select me any sibling element that come after, and I can give it display block, display none, and in this way I can show or hide other frames of the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. For example, when I'm clicking the How to Play label button element, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of How to Play pop-up. It will change its status from status of unchecked to status of checked. If this checkbox that has this ID name is in status of checked, this selector will start to work for us. If this checkbox is in status of checked, please go to the sibling element that has the ID name of How to Play. This is the real pop-up of How to Play, and I'm now just giving it display block, and now this pop-up is open. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing the pop-up? And it's really the same idea when you're thinking about it. In this case of this specific pop-up of How to Play, the X button and the close button again are not button HTML elements. Again, they are label HTML elements that are being connected with the for attribute to the same checkbox. And when this pop-up is open, this means that this checkbox is in status of checked. But if you will click this X and close label button element, with the for attribute that is being connected to the same checkbox, it will change the status of checkbox from checked to unchecked. This selector will stop to work, and we will get a display none that we declared in the beginning, and now the pop-up will be closed. But now you need to ask yourself another question. What will happen when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game? When I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to show the game frame itself. How can I do two operations with one status of one checkbox? And again, it's really the same idea when you're thinking about it. When the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game is being checked, please first go to the sibling element with the class of game menu frame and give it display none. After that, go to another sibling element with the class of game frame and give it display block. And in this way, technically, you can do as many operations that you want with one status of one checkbox. This way of written is, of course, written with Sass. It's being compiled to two separated CSS selector, but it's a lot more readable to read it and to write it with Sass. And now let's jump to one of the most interesting tricks that I have in this game. In this game, when I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures, they are being disappear and the CSS score is going up. We actually have here two tricks that we need to talk about them. Let's start with the first one. When I'm clicking those coronavirus creatures, they need to be disappeared. If you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label HTML element with a class of coronavirus, and inside we have input type radio. But I also told you that all the visual part of the virus are starting here with this div with the class of body. The eyes and the ears are inside the body of the coronavirus creature. What I'm doing in the real game, I'm taking the label HTML element, and with the CSS animation, I'm telling it to move around the screen. Because all the visual part are inside, it will take all the visual part with it. Okay, but it's also meaning that if I will click the visual part of the virus, it's like I'm clicking on the label HTML element because it's wrapped with the label HTML element. And because there is input type radio inside, it will automatically get triggered. In this case, I don't even need a for attribute in the ID name, because when there is an input inside its label, you're clicking the label, it will trigger automatically this input type radio inside, and this will change this status of this radio button from unchecked to status of checked. If this radio button is in status of checked, this is telling us that the virus is being dead, and now we just need to hide the visual part of the virus. To do so, I'm just selecting every input type radio that is being checked. Please go to the signaling element with all the visual part of the virus and give it opacity of 0. You see, when I'm doing CSS animation for the label HTML element, it's telling it to move around the screen. You're clicking on the visual part of the virus, it's like you're clicking on the label, it's triggering the radio button that's changing its status from unchecked to status of checked. And now I'm just using the status of checked for this radio button to hide all the visual part for the sibling element with the class of body. This way you are clicking on the coronavirus feature and they are being disappear from the screen. And now we need to print the total score to the screen. To do that, I'm using here another whole feature of CSS. I'm using here the CSS counter feature. And in order to it to work precisely, what we needed to do is to define the CSS counter before all the input type radio. The easiest place for me to do it is just to declare it on the body HTML element. How you define the CSS counter, you may ask? I'm just selecting every body HTML element, that we have only one, sorry about it, and to create a CSS counter, you're just using this special property of counter reset. This is creating me a CSS counter, and you can give it any name that you want. I gave it the name Corona. And now I need to count all those dead viruses. Really easy. Just selecting all the radio buttons that are being checked, counter incrementing the Corona counter that I declared here. And now I need to print the total score to the screen. In order to it to work precisely, it needs to be defined in the HTML part after all the input type radio. The easiest way for me to define it is in the bottom of the HTML document. Here, as you can see, I'm defining the div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML, and immediately after I want to print the total score. To do that, I'm just selecting the class of sum, using the after pseudo element that will come immediately after, using the content property that can get the native CSS counter function that just printing me the Corona counter that I incremented here and created here. In this way, it's listening and printing the total score to the screen. Because it's a really complicated example, let's see it in CodePen. Let's open this CodePen and we will praise to the God of CodePen that it will work. And okay, as you can see here, we kind of have 5 coronavirus creatures. You can even see here the input type radio. In the real game it has opacity of 0, and the div with the class of body, it's the visual part. This is the big black circles, and the eyes and the ears in the real game are here inside, okay? A place to summarize the score, I'm just putting here at the bottom, div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML, but the result 0 from 5 is coming from the CSS. To describe the CSS counter, I'm just selecting the body HTML element, using the special property to create a CSS counter of counter reset, and I gave it the name Corona. Whoops. And now every input type radio that is being checked, please increment me the counter increment of the Corona counter, okay? Beside of it, if the input type radio will be checked, please go to the sibling element with the class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type radio will be checked, it will go to this sibling element and will hide with all this visual part of the virus. And now we just need to print the total score to the screen. I'm just selecting the class of sum, using here the after pseudo element, calling the content property with the native CSS counter function that just printing me the Corona counter that I incremented here and created here, okay? Let's see that it really works. Let's put it here that you can see this input type radio. This is the, let's put it like this. And let's click the coronavirus feature. As you can see, the radio button is being checked. The CSS score is going up. And in this way, you can create a pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. Nice. But now let's jump to another amazing trick. How can I create a pure CSS countdown? To do that, let's open directly the CodePen example. As you can see here in the HTML part, I don't have any numbers. The numbers, again, are not coming from the HTML. Again, they are coming from the CSS. And as you can see here, I have a CSS animation on the content property. But, it's going only between 9 to 0. And here we have a number that's going between 99 to 0. What is actually happening here? What is actually happening here is that we have this span HTML element with a class of count. And these both numbers that looking like one integer, it's only two separated strings that are only really synchronized, that they're looking like one integer that every 1 second is going number down. This means that it needs to stay like that. And okay, and let's just understand exactly what you're seeing right now. Let's press here the text AA, and you will see that the numbers are being separated. Two separated string, okay? Nothing special, just two separated CSS string. And how it really works. As you can see here, the first value of the number is the before pseudo element. This is the first value. I'm calling here the animation of countdown, and I'm telling it to work for 100 seconds and one iteration. 100 seconds and a total of 10 frames between 9 to 0. Think about it. It means that every 10 seconds will go number down. 20 seconds another, and so on and so on. And I told it to work only for one iteration. After the one iteration, I want it to be stuck on the last frame of the animation of 0. To do that, I'm just putting here the forward value, that telling the animation that when you finish all your iteration, in this case only one, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. For the second value, I'm using here the after pseudo element, before and after, yes, second value. And I'm calling now the same animation, but in a different way. I'm telling the animation now to work for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. 10 seconds, 10 frames, this means that every 1 second you go number down. 2 seconds another, and so on and so on. When it will finish the first iteration, it will do it again for another 9 iteration. Why? Because I declare here that I want it to work for a total of 10 iteration. And when it will finish all those 10 iteration, again I want that animation will start with the 0 value. In order to do that, I'm just putting here the forward value, that telling the animation after you are finishing all your 10 iteration, please be stuck on the 0 value. And let's see that it really works. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, finish. Nice. Now let's continue to another thing. Random values. First, I wanted to show you why I wanted to create random stuff in my own game. And then let's take a look again on the game itself. Let's play it again. If you can see, the location of the coronavirus creature are randomized. Even the scale of them is randomized. And even the rotation of them is randomized. But wait a minute. How can you create random stuff in CSS? You can't, but we can do it with SAS. Because it's a really important example, first I want to show you this in the real code of the game. And you need to understand, if every coronavirus have a different location, this means that I needed to create 100 different CSS animation for every one of those coronavirus creatures. And because I didn't want to write them one by one, how I done it, let's see it in the real code. I'm using here, yes, this is it, let's do one zoom out. I'm using here this SAS for loop that is running 100 iteration. In every one of the iteration, this created me dynamically this CSS animation. For every one of those coronavirus creatures, I have 6 different locations in the game. The translate X is always the same, but the translate Y, as you can see here inside, I'm using here the SAS random function that randomizes me, in this case, a value between 1 to 80. and I'm just doubling it in one VH. Either for the scale, I'm using the SAS random function, and even for the rotation, I'm using here the SAS random function. Because I don't want you to be afraid from this SAS random function, let's open another example that it's more easier to understand. Now that you will not be afraid from this pug, let's compile it to HTML, because pug is just HTML in the end. As you can see, I have here 6 empty li HTML elements. You see? Nothing special, but the values that you see inside are not coming from the HTML. Again, they're coming from the CSS part. In the SAS code, I have here a SAS for loop that's running 6 iterations. This is the variables of amount of variables, it's running 6 iteration, and in every one of the iteration, this creating me dynamically the CSS selector between class 1 to class 6. In every one of the iteration, the before pseudo element on the content property, inside the string, I'm just using here the SAS random function that randomizes me value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in one VH. And for you to believe me that those values are really randomized, the only thing that I need to do is just to compile the SAS code again to CSS. To do that, I just need to press here enter. Let's press enter, and you will see that the numbers are being changed. If I will do it again, they will change again, and if I will do it again, they will change again, and so on and so on. And that you will not be afraid from it, because SAS is just being compiled to CSS. How it's being compiled to CSS, how it looks like, just regular CSS. Nothing special, okay? The next tricks that I want to talk about it's in the end of the game. In the end of the game, after 99 seconds, I'm putting the game over curtain, and I wanted to create this effect that the player can play this game again and again and again. But I had this problem, because I understand that in order that the user will be back to the game menu navigation, there is one checkbox that was checked that need to be unchecked. And to reset the CSS score of the game, I need to reset all the radio button that was checked to unchecked. And I thought about a lot of ways on how I can do it. But in the end, I found the best solution. The back to main menu button, in this case, it's not a label HTML element. It's a special input of input type reset. You can use input type reset, you can use button type reset, they are similar. And now, in order to this button to work, the only thing that I needed to do is just to wrap everything with a form HTML element. Now, I'm clicking on this button type reset. Because it's inside the form HTML element, it will reset all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. This will bring us automatically to the game menu navigation. All the radio button that was checked will be now unchecked. This will reset the CSS score to 0. And now you can play this game again and again and again. And the last question that you need to ask yourself is how can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? I need to put it exactly after 99 seconds. And this is one of the most easiest tricks that I have in this game. Everyone knows that CSS animation have animation duration. Animation duration is telling the browser how much time the animation need to take from the start until the end. But what we are also forget that we have a second animation duration. We have animation delay duration. That's telling the animation after how much time it needs to be start. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. It's inside the frame of the game, and because it's with display none, only when I'm giving a display block, it's starting to count. And it has in the real game 99 seconds, and in the second that I'm changing the element from display none to display block, it's starting to count. And let's see that it really works. Let's refresh the screen, and we will see that in this case it will go up after 5 seconds. Let's refresh the screen and let's count together. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, game over, okay? In this talk, we saw a lot of tricks that with them you can create pure CSS game, and maybe you are thinking that this is the main key takeaway. But it isn't. What I want you to take from this talk is to create your own fun project in CSS, in JavaScript, I really don't care. Why it's really so important to do fun project and only for fun, not for your company, not for someone that pay you money, not that you will create from it specific money, maybe to create a project that is just for your fun. Because we as adults, we're starting to forget that the best way to learn new stuff is by playing. When we're small children, we are playing and we're having fun and we learn new stuff. In the animal kingdom, small kittens like hunting each other, having fun playing, and when they're adults, they know how to hunt. But what we as adults starting to do, we're starting to learn things in the hard way, in the boring way, in the frustrating way, instead of trying to create our own fun project, enjoy. In the end, you're learning new stuff. If you are getting to be a lot better web developer, in the end, you will get a better salary. And to tell you the truth, even this is not important. Because the most important thing in life is to have fun. Life are so short, trying to enjoy every second that you can. Before we finish, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect at Upright, which is an open source Firebase alternative that you can download. It's free. If you want the slide, this is the QR code. The best place to follow me is via my Twitter. You can see all the other stuff in my own website. And if you want to play the game, you have here my CodePen account. Thank you very much. There is time for question, and if someone wants to ask, raise his hand and do it really because it's, oh, yes. Yes, I will ask the question again. If I'm when I'm starting to play the game, the location of the virus is always the same. In order that the virus will change, we'll have to compile the SAS code to CSS. But people not noticing it, think about it. And it's only for fun, really. It's like, don't do it, it's like, I don't ask you to build real game in CSS. It's really only for fun. Don't use label HTML element in your own website as button. No. Use buttons. More semantic, more accessibility, and more correct. Yes? This is a fun. Just remember that. It's really important. More questions? Yes?
What's the CSS variable you said?
How the?
The CSS variable that's holding the corona score. Is that actually reset by the input reset?
It's really, how I'm resetting the CSS score of the game. What is counting the CSS score of the game is the CSS counter that is counting all the radio buttons, yes? And they need to be checked in order then to be counted. But when I'm resetting with the button of type reset or input type reset, it's removing all their checked radio buttons to unchecked. This is immediately resetting the CSS score of the game to 0. Okay? Understood? Yeah? Good. More questions? Ask. Yes? Technically you can. I thought about it. I don't know why I didn't do it. It's like I worked on this project exactly 2 full days on the weekend, and then I told myself stop. Good enough, but you can. I even saw one game, I think, that they put some sound. It's not so hard even to do that, but you can. I don't even know now how to do it, but it's not so complicated. And there are a lot of more CSS crazy games. Believe me, if I will go to my Twitter account, I think I retweeted several days ago. Let's go here, and we'll show you another small example of this one. This is amazing. This is a pure CSS game, like old games, if you remember, like King Quest. This done only CSS HTML, no JavaScript. Let's play the game. And you would see, play, yes, thank you, how many plays? This is, you can run, move here, no JavaScript. You can see things, you can look on things, and there is thing. You can here go in the stairs, only CSS. And if you do some pure CSS game, retweet me, I will happy to retweet it, okay? More question. More question, don't be afraid, I'm not biting, really. Fun, everyone, no, more questions? Well, going once, going to, yes. Yes, my first game is so ugly that I don't even created the creature there, I even give a credit there. But it didn't have a menu, it's just start. And even you can see here that the bird is from this author. And this was my ugly first game. And I need to kill them. It's hard, even more than the first, second game. But and the bird I didn't paint. Like in this game, the new game, I created everything. But this was my first ugly game. But this took me 3.5 hours in the night. The second game I put 2 full days. More questions? No? Yes? 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 If you want to ask me, go ask me outside. I'm here until the end of the day. And again, thank you very much for listening.